Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Solus. So here is the plan that Dominique, Laurent, and I will show you this morning. First, I will make an introduction. Then I will ask Dominique, Laurent to explain how core data complement and spy. So Dominique will present the general approach of the working group. She will then present concrete examples of core themes, and then she will conclude about the linkage between core data and Inspire. And then we will present frequently asked questions about core data. And last, we will show you some slides suggesting how you can contribute to the work on core data. So first, let me introduce this topic. Well, I will not read completely this slide, but just to remind you that in 2014, UN-GGIM Europe was not yet existing, it was not yet created, and therefore there have been a preparatory report that was made to recommend the creation of UN-GGIM Europe. And in fact, this preparatory report contained some recommendation about core data. And especially this report investigated the usage of authoritative geospatial data in terms of both public policies and also development of downstream services by the private sector. And in this respect, the preparatory report concluded that geospatial data are required to be homogeneous over Europe. And one of the main reasons of this homogeneity requirement is that there is a need to enable the implementation of public policies in a coherent and coordinated way among the European countries. So this is the main reason to have to promote homogeneous data. And I think that later Dominique will go more into detail in the SDGs. And really, I think that the SDGs confirm this need to have implementation of public policies in a coordinated way among countries. So really, this was the main reason to promote homogeneous data over Europe. And unfortunately, this preparatory report, it noted that available geospatial data remain heterogeneous between the European countries. This is why this report concluded that it is really desirable to intensify the coordination between the countries and the European institutions to identify, define, produce, and distribute pan-European harmonized geospatial core data. So just to conclude that this is really the origin of the working group on core data, and this is the origin of the thinking about the requirements for core data. So this is why this is following this preparatory report in 2014 that the working group on core data was created. It consists of 15 European countries that are listed in this slide. And also we have the GRC of the European Commission, the European Environment Agency, and EuroGeographics that are observers of this working group. So first slide, what is core data according to the working group? Well, the working group proposed to define core data as priority data, geospatial data, of course, that are the most useful to analyze, achieve, or monitor the sustainable development goals, either directly or indirectly. What does this mean indirectly? It means that core data, sometimes it can serve the SDGs directly, or sometimes core data can serve the SDG indirectly. Indirectly, it means that you can use the core data as a basis, as base data on which you can build more specific data which will be used for the SDGs. Now, what are the objectives of the working group on core data? The first objective is to define core data and to encourage the member states to produce and to supply it. And you know that we are starting from common requirements from the SDGs, and we hope that logically, these common requirements from the SDGs, they should lead to the availability of a common minimum content in all the member states. The second objective of the working group on core data is to define priorities to produce new data or to improve existing data. So this is how we think that core data could become available, either by improving existing data or by produce new data. So in this way, we could say that the recommendation for content that will be produced and proposed by the working group on core data, they will be used by the decision makers and the data providers. In this slide, let me show you the work plan of the working group on core data. The first work package, it's about recommendation for content. So you can see in the left, the working group first wrote a core data scope, and this core data scope, in fact, it selected 14 core data themes. These 14 core data themes were selected amongst the 44 data themes from INSPI, and so we considered all the INSPI themes, and we investigated which were the most important themes to meet the SDGs, and we selected 14 data themes. And in the right now, you can see that now the working group is working to propose recommendations for content for each of the 14 core themes. And now, and later, there will be also another important work package that is about economic model, political and financial framework for supporting core data availability. So you have to know that at the moment, the working group has not yet addressed this work package. But of course, this second work package, it contains issues that are very important to ensure the availability of core data. So the two steps of the working group, as I said, the first step was to select the core data themes, and now the second step is to define the content of the core data themes. So this is about the first steps. You can see in red the list of the selected core data themes amongst all the INSPI themes. And if you want to know more about this first step, you can go to the links that are on these slides. Especially, you can see in the bottom the document about the scope of core data is available online. Now, I would like to ask Dominique Laurent to please explain us a very important issue. This is how core data complement INSPI. This is a very important question. Now, please, Dominique, can you give us more information about this very important question?
Yes, the webinar is organized by INSPI Ken. So what is the articulation between core data and INSPI? First, the general approach. How is core data complementing INSPI? We have very often the question, we already have INSPI, why core data? Because INSPI is not enough. INSPI, the main goal is the harmonization of existing data. It's a common exchange model, but the content is still heterogeneous. For instance, there is no indication about the expected scale, level of detail. Almost all attributes are voidable, so there is no guarantee of a common content. And core data is about encouraging the production of new data or upgrade of existing data. In summary, INSPI is about the structure, it's about a common data model whereas core data is about common content. Another comparison, more with images, maybe some of you have already seen it. InSpy may be seen as a big cheese with lots of holes. And the drawback is that users begin to complain because information is missing. Typically, during the health final event, there was a user about emergency mapping saying InSpy data, health data, it's wonderful because we can use national data when it is harmonized. What we could not do at all if not harmonized because we do things for urgent, for emergency, but nevertheless, it's a bit disappointing when you click on an attribute, it's just an empty box. So for core data, the purpose is to have some cheese, maybe smaller, but compact and really filled with information. If we see something maybe more serious, more textual, regarding InSpy and core data, the main driver of InSpy is the European Commission, whereas in UN-GGIM it's the United Nations. The geographic scope also is different. For InSpy, it's more the political Europe, European Union, whereas in UN-GGIM, for core data, it's whole geographical Europe. We have also a different universe of discourse, but with lots of overlaps. InSpy, the focus is on environment in a wide meaning, because it's policies that may have impact on the environment, whereas UN-GGIM core data is about sustainable development. So we have the environment, but we have also economy and society. The other topic is that InSpy aims mainly to the data delivery. The aim is to make data accessible to users, whereas core data, it's more recommendation for the production of new data. And there is also clearly a big difference in the status. InSpy is a European directive, so it's a legal obligation for member states, whereas core data is just UN recommendation. It's encouragement to member states. We hope this recommendation will have the weight of United States and be implemented, but there is no legal obligation. So now let us see what are the objectives regarding the content. Our deliverables are called recommendation for content for the 14 selected themes, and they are based on mainly two pillars. The first one is existing standards, so mainly InSpy. We don't begin from scratch. We are very happy to have the InSpy data specification. It's really very precious for our work. And we have the user requirements with focus on the sustainable development goals related use cases. What is our methodology for core data working group? Regarding features and attributes, core data is about minimum content. So in general, the idea is to select the priorities from InSpy data models. So in general, we have less than InSpy. However, we have, as you have seen in the previous slide, we have a wider universe of discourse than InSpy. InSpy is about environment. Core data is about environment, society, economy. So in some cases, we can have more than InSpy, so we add the missing elements. And what is important also is that we add the other content components that are almost absent in InSpy. Typically, what is the geographic extent? What are the level of detail? What are the scales that are expected? What are the quality criteria about accuracy, completeness, topology, etc. And also some data capture rules or recommendation. It's also among the added value of core data. If we look, we have also 3 types of recommendation because defining priority is always tricky. We have the core recommendation themselves. It's what is highly required and what seems achievable, and ideally it should lead to short-term action. We have good practice. In a way, it's priority 2. It's bring added value to core data. It's something to be encouraged, but it may be done maybe according to countries on a short, medium term. And we have further consideration. In fact, it's a topic of interest, but we don't really know which recommendation to do. So we don't know which recommendation to do for production. So we make recommendations generally about research, knowledge exchange, assessing cost and benefits for the new topics that we have identified. In our methodology, we try also to have an iterative process, a little as in InSpy in a way. We have the preparation phase with investigation, discussion, interview with users, and so on. And someone, the editor makes the initial draft that is first reviewed by all the members of the working group. And then this consolidated draft is submitted to the review by the whole geostatistic community. And then we make the definitive deliverable. Some first results, of course, regarding the InSpy themes, the situation is very diverse. We have some well-defined themes, I will say, such as cadastral parcel, address, administrative unit. In this case, the added value of core data is mainly related to the quality. We clarify which kind of data is expected regarding level of detail, accuracy, completeness, and things like this. There are some themes in InSpy that are very rich with lots of features and attributes. It's typically the case of transport network and hydrography. So the main action we will do is to extract core information because not everything can be priority. We have to make selection on this core information. And the most difficult is that in InSpy there are themes that are almost empty, for instance, elevation, ortho-image, land cover, because there is almost no indication about which content is expected. It's really just an exchange format and nothing else. So we have to think about the levels of detail and also the content. For instance, for elevation, should we have just a digital terrain model or also a digital surface model? Which colors to use for ortho-image and things like this. So it's more difficult for us. It's why if you see our progress, we have made good progress on the well-defined themes by InSpy, such as address, administrative unit, cadastral parcel, geographical name, buildings, utilities, and governmental service. And we are not so advanced on the other themes. So now some concrete examples with some themes with more detailed. I will give 3 examples. The first case is I will say the general case is restricting InSpy. I will give the example of cadastral parcel. A second case is a case when we have extended InSpy. It will be for geographical name. And a third case when we have really adapted the InSpy data model and even changing it. It's the case of basic services. So the first case, cadastral parcels. We have extracting priority features and attributes from InSpy data model, and we have just highlighted the selected features and attributes on the InSpy data model. So it's just showing which are the core attributes of the feature type, for instance, here cadastral parcel. There is no change in InSpy data model. We have just highlighted the core content that is expected. That is the most important. And we have added some quality recommendation, for instance, encouraging cadastral parcels forming a partition of territory. The geographic extent should be whole land territory, so we are encouraging the cadastration of public domain. It's a significant good practice that we like to encourage because it's really needed for SDG in general. We are also encouraging, of course, completeness, good topology, no gaps or overlaps, cadastral parcels as single areas, and we are also encouraging an efficient link with the land registry to ensure the land tenure security with temporal consistency between cadastral map and land registry. So it's a very simple example about cadastral parcels. Second case is geographical names. Geographical names, we have extended the INSPI data model for several reasons. We think that the INSPI classification of nameplace is quite generic and it will be required to have something more detailed. So we recommend to use the IGN code list or some national code list that may be matchable with the EuroGeographics Names code list. The other point is that we would like to promote objective criteria for the selection of nameplace because the selection criteria really needed for mapping. Typically, we are encouraging to have the population, as it is the case, for instance, in Euro regional map, and also to have the area of the feature by representing the nameplace with the true geometry. In general, nameplaces are represented just by point, and it's not really relevant, for instance, for a chain of mountain, for part of sea or things like this. They will deserve to be represented by surface. Of course, this surface may be more or less reliable, and they will have to be documented. Some graphical illustration. In INSPI, there is something about this selection criteria, but it's the least detailed viewing resolution and the most detailed viewing resolution. They are selection criteria that are coming by human interpretation. There is no guideline about how to use them in a consistent way, and so they are not so useful. It's why in core data, we have recommended to have the geometry with true geometry, typically rather as a surface, and to have the population indication also as selection criteria. And accompanying this geometry, also some indication about the reliability of the geometry. To have this objective criteria for core data. For those who like technique, the data models that are provided by core data are just illustration. It's to be sure that our recommendations are perfectly clear and understandable, but they are not supposed to be resources. They won't be provided. We are not going to derive GML on things like this. It's just to make things very clear. Typically, as it is for production, we expect that each data producer will have its own production model in its national language. It's just to clarify the recommendation and nothing else. Regarding the reliability, for instance, if it's an island, you can, of course, draw the geometry of the island with good accuracy. If it's a populated area, more or less, I'm guessing that no one will have exactly the same geometry of a populated area, but they will very close from one another, so it's medium accuracy. And for instance, if it's something like the channel between France and England, the geometry, at least in first step, may be very fuzzy and reliability will be undefined. For geographical name, we have also added some other recommendation. The main one is that our recommendation are production driven. So we have tried to have the scope limited to name places that are not in other themes, mainly populated places, landform, land cover. The purpose is also to give some guidelines to producer to produce things once only. We have tried to avoid the overlaps between themes as much as possible. And we have also different quality rules for endonyms and exonyms because there are not the same expectation regarding, for instance, the geographic extent or the level of details that may be expected for this kind of geographical names. Last examples, the more complex, is about basic services. Some context, in fact, the InSpy theme utility and governmental services was selected as last one among the core data themes after lots of discussion. And I think it was pushed by Eurostat, saying it's really interesting. It's quite a pity you didn't select this theme. And saying at least the sub-theme governmental service, it's very useful. It looks feasible. So please accept this theme as core theme, what we have done. And there was another reason, of course, is that many sustainable development goals mention access to basic services. So we have revised the scope of InSpy theme very strongly, and it's why also we have renamed it Basic Services. If we look at revising the scope of InSpy, in InSpy there are three application schema, one about administrative and social governmental services, one about environment management facilities, it's mainly waste management, and one about utility network. For core data, what we have done in InSpy, the list of public service is very limited, with focus on environment, and for the SDG, other public services may be required. So we have extended InSpy in a way for the governmental services, but regarding the other application schemas, we have only kept the main features of the other data models. For instance, in the utility, we have kept only the power plants in the electricity network, and in the environmental management facilities, we have kept only the landfill, the waste treatment plant. And it's the scope of basic unit. So on one hand, it's quite less than InSpy. On the other hand, it's a little more for the governmental services. And regarding the utility network, it's an example of consideration for future, because we know it's very useful, but we know also that it's more difficult to achieve. It's done in some countries, but in many other countries, it's really still quite a challenge. So as a result, we have shown a model that is not InSpy. It's another feature type. It's basic services. It's basic service, but it's very close. It's very close to the InSpy data model on governmental services. For instance, we had to extend the code list about the type of service. In InSpy, for instance, what is about leisure, about entertainment, recreation is excluded from InSpy, and the code list is not extensible, whereas for the SDG, it may be useful. Sport is important, for instance, about SDG 3, about the health, because sport contributes to health, or culture contribute also to SDG 4 about education. So we had really to extend the list of possible services. So we are close to InSpy, but not really conform to InSpy. So some conclusion about how it works, complementing InSpy. InSpy is about harmonizing existing data. Core data is about defining priorities. So in general, we make selection within the InSpy data model. So we have less than in SPY. In SPY is about delivery, whereas core data is about production. So we try to revise the scope. It's not we try to revise the scope of each theme, but we try to avoid overlaps. And if necessary, we may revise the scope of each theme. Another example, for instance, is hydrography. In SPY, there is the hydro network and the physical waters. We think that a single database should be able to derive these two kinds of data. So probably we will also organize the thing little differently for hydrography. And the other reason is in SPY is mainly for environment, whereas core data is for sustainable development. So sometimes we have to make some extension. As it was shown for basic services, we have included other types of basic services. And sometimes also we just add things because in SPY is not totally enough, as it was the case for geographical names. From the producer point of view, core data recommendation for content, they are widely based on InSPY data specification, and we try to make them compatible with InSPY. So generally, it's just selection of priority feature and attribute, and if there are extension of modification, at least the overlapping content is easily matchable with InSPY. So core data should be easy to transform into InSPY data models. Regarding the user point of view, core data is aiming at having production of common content. InSPY is the delivery of data according to common data model, common format, common services. And if we add these two initiatives together, of course, users will get harmonized data with both common minimum content and common structure. And now I let François explain you some frequently asked questions and propose some elements of answer.
Thank you, Dominique. First very frequent question is this one. What is the European Commission position regarding core data? As I said in the start of our presentation, GRC and EEA are observers of the working group on core data. Of course, the fact that they are observers, it shows that they think that this topic is interesting. And I have to say that there is a big interest about the approach we propose about core data, and especially Eurostat several times has expressed his very great interest for this approach of core data. Of course, sometimes GRC, they made some reservation when the recommendation for core data of the working group don't 100% don't fully align with InSPY data specifications. But of course, it's understandable because the GRC, they would prefer that we stay 100% compliant with InSPY. But anyway, I have to say that the extensions or the adaptations that the working group proposes with respect to InSPY are very limited, as Dominique has shown in the present slide. So really, if sometimes there is a small deviation from core data with respect to InSPY, really these deviations are very small. The next frequently asked question is how to ensure production of core data. As I said, the working group is currently working on the raw package about core data content. And as I said in the start of the presentation, there is another work to be undertaken about the economic context and the political context. And so this has not yet been investigated, but of course this will have to be investigated later, because the economic and political aspects of core data are very important to ensure the availability. So they have to be investigated. So here you can see we are currently working on the green work package, the top work package, but the bottom work package, it's the next activity that will have to be undertaken. Next question is how to continuation about the same question, how to ensure production of core data. So as I said, this work package about economic and political context has not yet been addressed. However, the working group can already propose some draft answers, and it is especially very important to note that core data is already partly available. You have seen some examples of a recommendation for content in the previous slides from Dominique. And of course, I think that you realize that a big part of the recommendations, you already have them available in your one country. And you have made a big work about NSPI, so you already have a good availability. And so in this schema, you can see it depends, of course, of the countries. You can see country A, country B, country C. Of course, depending on the countries, you don't have exactly the same data that is available. And so the efforts to implement core data will not be exactly the same depending on the country. However, you can see this red line. This is the minimum common content that is recommended by the working group on core data. And even in some cases, you can see that countries may already have some better data. So of course, it depends on the core themes, it depends on the countries. For one particular core theme, some countries will have better data, and for other countries, there will be other countries that will have better data. And so, as you can see in this schema, core data is about filling the gaps between what is available in green and the red line. Again, with the same question, how to ensure the production of core data. Again, the working group proposes some draft answers. Of course, it will depend on the goodwill of data producers. And already we can see that there have been very positive feedback and positive reactions from data producers about the first recommendations for content that have been proposed by the working group. And here you can see an example of reaction from Lithuania. And I think that we had already many similar reactions. Many data producers, they think that the recommendations for content are relevant, and of course it will help the goodwill of the data producers, and it will help the implementation of the recommendations. And this is thanks to the fact that the working group pushes all its draft recommendations to a review process by the larger geostatistical community. And the working group also strives to communicate a lot about its recommendations. And this is thanks to this wide process that we can get positive feedback from data producers. What also I have to say is that the users, I mean the governments, the administrations that are involved in SDGs, also they are very interested by the potential availability of core data. So the users, they push the availability of core data. And especially if we consider the statistical community, we have noticed that they have expressed a lot of interest for the core data. Also, I would like to mention, you know, EuroGeographics is currently preparing a new product whose name is Core Reference Data. And this new product, it would be a pan-European product at large scale, which is a very new and very important shift in EuroGeographics, because, you know, up to now, the EuroGeographics products that were at small or middle scale. So this shift to larger scale, I think it's very interesting for the users. And the first version of this core reference data, it will be limited to transport theme and hydrographic theme, because these two themes, transports and hydrography, they are required very urgently by the current land cover second generation backbone. So this is really the urgency to work on these two themes. But I think that the Commission and the European institutions, they have larger requirements. So I guess that for next versions, EuroGeographics might consider to include maybe more core themes in this core reference data. Now let's continue about this question, how to ensure production of core data. This slide is about the difficulties that we may expect to encounter when producing core data. So the first difficulty is that the working group, it is proposing recommendations, but of course it's not a legal obligation. Of course, UN-GGIM Europe has not legal or regulatory power. It's UN-GGIM Europe, it's not the European Union. So there will be no legal obligation to produce, to have core data available. There will be only a recommendation. And so, of course, we cannot guarantee that core data will be implemented 100% everywhere. Also, another difficulty that can be expected is that there are two kinds of stakeholders that are very involved in the working group on core data. These are, of course, the NMCAs, but also the National Statistical Institute are a lot involved in the process. But of course, you know that some core data themes, they are not the responsibility of NMCAs and not the responsibility of National Statistical Institutes. And so maybe it will be more difficult to involve such data producers. Here are examples. Of course, if you take the C data about geographical names, the C data about elevation themes, they are not the responsibility of NMCAs. Of course, and also the land cover and land use themes. For this theme, it depends on the countries. In some countries, the NMCAs have responsibility about these themes, but in some other countries, these are not the NMCAs who are responsible for these themes. And also, two other examples, the regulated areas of the basic services. Sometimes it's not the NMCAs that are in charge of these two themes. And there are, of course, potentially other core themes that are not the responsibility of NMCAs. Next question is the following. Will we have to set up core data services in addition to the NSPI services? And the response that is proposed by the working group is that core data is expected to be delivered through enhanced national products and also through enhanced NSPI data. So really, it's important to see that the working group does not recommend to have core data services in addition to NSPI services, but rather the working group recommends to have synergies and convergence between core data services and NSPI services. Of course, this question, as I said, has not yet been fully investigated. It will have to be investigated later in the activity about economic model and political and financial framework for supporting core data availability. Next, very important and very frequent question is about the articulation between core data and global fundamental data. Clare Hadley, who is the head of the working group on global fundamental data, will make you the next presentation. And so I propose that this question is discussed after the presentation from Claire. Next question is, how could you contribute to the working group on core data? So first, very often the working group invites all stakeholders to contribute to its work. And especially each time the working group makes a draft recommendation for content for a core themes, then the working group launches a review by the larger geospatial and statistical community. And so, of course, your contributions to your feedback to this review by the geostatistical community would be very welcome. And especially currently, we have just launched last week a review of a deliverable recommendation for content about core theme buildings. So this has just been open to review until end of August 2018. And of course, this core theme is interesting for many of you. And so your feedback will be very, very welcome. Sometimes also the working group submit questionnaires in order to have more knowledge about, for example, the requirements for Codata and about what selections would be more relevant for Codata. And so, of course, if you have a possibility to answer such questionnaires, it will be very welcome. Next, also, if you can contribute to disseminate the awareness about Codata activities within both your own organization, your NMCA, and within also all your national community, of course, it will be very welcome. And of course, last, the implementation of Codata, it will be a very important next stage once the deliverables and the recommendations for content are definitive. And of course, your organizations will be key in the implementation of Codata. Thank you for your attention, and if you have questions, we can take them, and after I will give the floor back to Solius and to Claire. So thank you. If you have questions, please raise your hand.
Thank you, François. I have two questions in the chat window. They both are from Peter Parslow from Ordnance Survey. And the questions are to Dominique, actually. The first question is, Dominique, with the cadastral parcels, you used the term public domain. Could you say a bit more about what that means?
A public domain is given just as an example. The recommendation, in fact, is to have a cadastral parcel forming a partition of the land territory. For instance, in many countries, such as France, the streets or the rivers are considering to belonging to everyone, and they are considered as public domain, and they should be transformed into cadastral parcel. But in other countries, it may be other parts missing. The real recommendation is to have a cadastral parcel forming a partition of the land territory.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And the next question is also to you, Dominique, regarding geographical names. As you emphasize population and true geometry, you are presumably prioritizing formal name populated places. Are these not administrative units?
So, in fact, in theme geographical name, we recommend that the production focus on the name places that are not yet in other places, in other themes. For instance, administrative units are already in theme administrative units. It's no use to capture them twice. They should be captured in administrative units with their names as attributes. And in theme geographical name, we focus on the name places that are not in other themes, such as populated places, settlements, villages, cities, this kind of thing, and for instance, landform, land cover.
Okay.
And regarding these settlements, their limits may be not as clear, as well defined as the limits of administrative units, of course.
Okay, thank you. Those have been two questions posed by the audience. Please, if anyone wants to raise any question, please raise your hand. Just for the information, also, as Jordi asked, all presentations will will be made available to you after the webinar. So, in addition to the video record. Okay, I don't see any raised hand. I think then we can move to second presentation by Clare Hadley. So I'm passing the screen to Clare. Clare, you should receive. Okay, yeah, we see your screen.
Can you hear me?
I hear you, but very, very silently. Maybe you can come closer to the mic.
Yes, it's on my headset. So is that any better?
Yes, I can hear you, but much more silently than, for example, François and Dominique.
Let me think what I can do here to make it closer. If I speak like that, is that better?
Yes, please. I think
I'll try to hold the microphone closer to my mouth.
Okay.
Okay. Right, good morning, everybody. Let me just. So my presentation is about the GGIM Global Fundamental Geospatial Data Themes, which is work which GGIM Europe has taken on in the last 3 years, and UK has taken the lead from there. So let me remove my. Right. So what I want to do this morning is to just show you what has been happening in the last 2 to 3 years with this work group, and then show the outputs we've had and where we think it will be going in the future. And obviously a relevant question for us is, how does this work tie in to the work of the core data group, which François and Dominique have just been talking to you about. So first of all, I just want to explain a few things so we all have the same understanding of what it is we've been doing. So just scope out and then look at the journey. So first of all, why is it global? Well, it's probably a silly question, but this is GGIM activity. It applies to the whole world. It's not just about member states, but perhaps more relevantly, we want to deal with global issues here. We obviously have the Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 Agenda, which we all know about, but there are other parts to the Sustainable Development Agenda as well, all of which require data. And whilst we might need to tackle these initiatives at local level, we also need to consider global standards and global approaches to ensure interoperability, to make sure that we do not waste effort in reinventing something which has happened or already been invented elsewhere in the world, so we can move on more quickly, and so that we can allow global comparisons between our countries and other countries, and between our region and other regions. So the argument for tackling this in a top-down global way is easily made, not that it's not the only way to tackle it, of course. So secondly, why geospatial? This is one with this particular audience, I don't think I need to go into very much detail on this one, but this is at least in part a presentation I prepared for a broader audience. But it is probably relevant to say that there were some lessons learned from the Millennium Development Goals, which of course came to an end in 2015. Sorry, I'm just switching my phone to silent so you don't hear those dings in the background. And as we all know, that geospatial is not just valuable for monitoring. You can see there in the Millennium Development Goal report, they say that geospatial data can support monitoring, But it's also relevant, of course, for situation assessment, for policy formulation, for delivery activities, evaluation, and monitoring. So to an extent, including geospatial data in the UN agenda is a response to the report from the Millennium Development Goals. Now, I also don't need to tell this audience about the value of a spatial data infrastructure, but the value of a SDI is something which we do need to promote to the non-geospatial audience. This is a slide which I have taken and borrowed from Greg Scott at the GGIM Secretariat, and you'll see that he sets the NSDI on the left-hand side there, sitting on a set of fundamental data themes beneath it. Now, why fundamental? This is a little bit more interesting, or perhaps needs a little bit more discussion, because you've been hearing about core data for the last half hour to an hour, and this whole issue led to quite a lot of discussion in our work group and with the regions. There was a general understanding that it was about determining what is necessary and underpins everything else, and hence is a starting point. But it was very difficult to get any agreement on what word we should use and exactly how to define it. We had a number of workshops and we spent quite a lot of time on this issue. And we asked the workshop participants, what do you mean? What do you think of? What do you mean in your head by fundamental? And we came up with a lot of different answers. And I think of these as characteristics rather than definitions. There was no real consensus on which of these were the most important, but everybody believed they were all valid. So the conclusion we came to was that fundamental in this context doesn't actually have a definition. It has a list of characteristics which are non-exclusive and non-exhaustive, which is the approach we took. The only consensus view we got really was that what was important was that they were important for the applications we had in mind. So things were fundamental for particular applications, and in our instance it was about achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So that took us back to the whole raison d'etre of the work, which was to achieve Sustainable Development Goals. But as I said earlier, it's not just about monitoring them, it's about baseline measurements, it's about evidence for determining actions you're going to take, it's for implementing the actions, and it's for monitoring and reporting. And as we know from the work in Europe, each of those stages requires different data. And this is a slide from the work that François and Dominique's group have been doing, which shows that we need different data for different stages of that cycle. And anyone who has been involved in policy knows that the stages I was talking about just then look like the stages in a policy cycle. And indeed, we can add value in all stages of the cycle, whether it's related to Sustainable Development Goal actions or not. Although I would just say that also anybody who has been involved in policy making knows that it doesn't actually work quite like that, but more like that. But the point is still there, the message is still there, that certain data will be needed at certain stages of the cycle, whatever the application. And of course, just to throw into this one, that this particular slide is coming from the Overseas Development Institute, which brings in some additional players, which we see in the Sustainable Development Goals of donors, and to a certain extent international organizations. So the fourth setting the scope question is why themes? And what's the implication of looking at themes rather than at data sets? Well, themes are a recurring theme, And once again, going back to this slide, you can see that the NSDI is sitting on top of a set of themes. So without those fundamental things, we can't support a spatial data infrastructure. And without that, we can't support the thematic layers we require in the middle here to support the sustainable goals on the right-hand side. So what did we mean by a theme? Well, let's start with subject matter. Subject matter is something which you can collect data about. Themes are simply categorizations of subject matter, and like any categorization, they can be hierarchical. Now, the basis for the categorization can vary, but in this instance, it was about the nature of the subject matter. And these are not the same as data sets, and so they're not the same as the data sets which we are collecting to the core data specifications. In that, a data set obviously is a collection of actual data about specific features. It will have some structure, it'll have some semantics, and it's the sort of thing that we're all probably quite familiar with. But crucially, it's a many-to-many relationship between themes and data sets. So one theme can and probably will require many data sets to contribute to it. One data set can actually contain features which relate to more than one theme. And I think that's quite an important point, and we can easily get ourselves confused between the two by using an inappropriate term in an inappropriate way. I'll just give you a couple of examples before I move on. So I have here the transport network as being a theme, which might possibly have categorizations relating to the nature of the transport, road, rail, water, etc. But the data sets may well apply to specific things like bus stops, road surface, or the actual interconnected network and the interconnectedness of it. But of course, the road surface data set may also include information which essentially is land cover data, which is an example of one data set holding data about which relates to more than one theme. Similarly, the bus stop data set might also have data which relates to physical infrastructure in it. A second example, water. The water theme could also have subcategories of the type of water, or maybe where it's found. I mean, there are different ways of subcategorizing water. But the actual data sets might come from actual observations, which might be samples. They might come from integrating data, maybe spatial analysis of pollution sources and water flow. They might come from sensors, which might be ocean wave monitors, or maybe interpretation of imagery. So I think this example gives you the very different data sources, which is producing actual information about specific features, all of which contribute to a theme. So in terms of things, we need a fundamental data, geospatial data, which is about people, which is about our built environment and about our natural environment. And I think those are the three broad categories. And to locate it, we need data which is direct, which is about actual subjects, or possibly proxies. Now, we use proxies quite a lot. Address, for example, can be a proxy for a person or a building, or even it can be a proxy for energy consumption. A phone track might be a proxy for a road, or maybe a commuter connection. Now, this was the topic of an interesting workshop a few weeks ago on the issue of how you modeled indirect data and to produce estimates and hence and error margins, and hence use those to produce actual data sets. But I'm not going to go any further into that at the moment. So returning now to having set the scope, returning to the route we have taken in the last couple of years, just a little bit of very quick background. At GGIM 5, Europe region prepared a report which went to the Committee of Experts, and the Committee of Experts agreed that there was indeed an urgent need for a set of global fundamental geospatial data themes that could be harmonized. And you can read the text of what they decided there. So the journey started then. GGIM Europe region was asked to take the lead to do the work, and this was the set of activities we were asked to take on. So there was producing the minimum list with description and guidelines, but importantly, we needed to look at existing work that was being undertaken by GGIM. So it was very much that we needed to build on what was already there and not try to reinvent something or start from the beginning. So just to run you through how we did it, we built on what had already been done. So the first thing was to ask the regions what they had done, and we got a lot of input from the other regions, and of course from Europe region we had some wonderful input from the Codata work group. We also had a work group set up which had members throughout the world, both from governments and also from the private sector, to help guide the work. And we also ran workshops, not just at GGIM events. We did have side meetings at the Committee of Experts. We had a side meeting at a high-level forum, but we also had a side meeting at the Geospatial World Forum in Rotterdam, which brought in the private sector and academia, which gave us a much broader input to the work. And it's not difficult to find existing work, to be honest. Every region had already considered this issue, so there was plenty of information out there. And inevitably, it varies in scope and it varies in approach. In fact, the one from Africa, the one on the right-hand side, was one of the first publications on fundamental data, and actually is still very valid and very good. So, having gathered up all the data, all the information we could find on existing work, we had, in a very general sense, 6 different lists of what was thought of to be fundamental or core or reference or whatever word was used in that particular area. And you can see that there is general consensus on the sort of the top few, and then it gets a bit more scattered as we go down, and you could actually draw a line anywhere where that red line is moving to be the set of core fundamental themes. But there is quite a lot of agreement. So, having looked at that and not found a definite answer, we took a different approach for a while, and we looked at what were the requirements of the SDGs. Now, various people have done this work. This happens to be the one which the EEA did very early on, cross-referencing INSPIRE theme with Sustainable Development Goals. And the darker the blue, the stronger the requirement. But once again, you can see there is no obvious line to be drawn as to which, and they used the INSPIRE themes because it was European work. There's no obvious line to be drawn as to which ones are definitely fundamental and which ones aren't. So both those approaches didn't produce a definite answer for us. So what we did is we used 2 criteria, 2 of those fundamental criteria we identified as being the top of the list. The first one was that other data are linked to the themes, i.e. something that other data is linked to, so something like an address or an admin area. And the other criteria for being fundamental was something that was used across many topic areas. Then we looked for the themes which applied to many Sustainable Development Goals or are critical for selected ones. We then cross-referenced with that chart I showed you of the 6 regions to produce the first draft list. That was then reviewed by the regions, the work group, the other GGIM groups, the small island developing states to produce what became the minimum list, which went to the GGIM 7 meeting for endorsement last August. There. So just that, and that was the list. Now, it might not look much of an output from a year's work, but the crucial thing was that we had built on the region's work and consultation It was related to the Sustainable Development Agenda, and most importantly, it had consensus from everybody. So that was the key thing we were looking for, was that everybody could agree on it. And it was a good point to move forward from. The next stage was to describe those themes in a bit more detail, together with initial guidelines on sources and standards. And the intended audience for this, we have to bear in mind, is not us. It's essentially the non-geospatial, which is why we've kept it to such a high level and not gone into detail. That is for the thematic specialists to do later on. The idea of this is to get political and donor buy-in to what's required and to get the ball rolling with the non-geospatial audience. And for that reason, we limited the theme descriptions to one side only. The idea was to get one on a page at a size of text that even those with older eyes could read. And our work group members and regions were kind enough to draft most of these for us. Here's an example. I'm not expecting you to read that, but just to show you how much information is included in it. So once again, we had a review process through the regions and the work groups. Thank you again to François and Dominique's group who reviewed them and produced a lot of input. And the final versions are now complete and are going to go to the Committee of Experts in August for endorsement. Now, those of you who remember the terms of reference slide I showed earlier on will realise that we've pretty much completed the work which we were set. So what next? Well, the next stages relate to getting the fundamental themes work out there and used to a non-geospatial audience. So first of all, it needs to be communicated. Now, the first point of communication, you'll be aware that the United Nations likes icons. The Sustainable Development Goals have a very identifiable set of icons for each goal. So to help with this, a set of icons have been developed for our themes, which are great. They have been developed by someone called Leslie Arnold in New Zealand, and she has developed them so there is a black and white set as well. The other thing that has been developed is a storyboard. Now I'm going to show you the storyboard after I've finished the presentation, just to make it a little bit easier, I think. So I'll come back to the storyboard in a moment. Now, the second major development is the geospatial framework. Now, at GGIM 7 last August, a major development was that a memorandum of understanding was signed between the United Nations Statistics Division and the World Bank. And this part of this work was to create a geospatial framework, which would be a bit like a blueprint, which countries could pick up and use to do a gap analysis, which would then identify gaps which could be funded by the World Bank. And the fundamental data themes are part of that geospatial framework, along with other work which GGIM groups have been doing, such as the Geodetic Reference Framework, the National Institutions Arrangements work, which Crumpets was involved with, and Antonio's work group, and other parts of the GGM, the standards work as well, which was coming from OGC, ISO, and IHO. All that, plus other material, is being put together to create a geospatial framework. And of course, the fundamental data themes are part of that. Oops, one slide behind. But then this will, of course, enable the whole concept of fundamental data themes to be rolled out more widely and also reach the non-geospatial audience. The third aspect of what happens next is regional and national implementation. Now, the first aspect of that is that there was a workshop on implementation held at the UN Conference Centre in Africa, in Addis Ababa, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, which I attended, and talked about how we got to where we are, but more importantly, helped to facilitate sessions with the directors of national mapping and statistical bodies or agencies in Africa on how they then pick those themes up and relate them to the implementation in their own country. And the thinking behind this workshop was that the same content could be, if it's successful, the same content could be repeated in other regions of the world and potentially in other member states. There is also a workshop in our region tomorrow afternoon at the GGIM plenary. So if any of you are attending that plenary, you'll be seeing some very familiar looking slides tomorrow afternoon as well. But that will then pick up, we will then pick up how these themes could be implemented in Europe. So just before I show you the storyboard, I just want to look at the relationship between what we've been doing at the global level and what we've been doing at the European level. So what we have done is determined a minimum set of themes, a very high level. They're not intended to have detail in them, whereas the core data group has started from the Inspire themes and developed the core data specifications. Now, the core data group has contributed very largely to the fundamental data work group, which has been extremely valuable. The global themes are essentially the wider context into which the European work can fit. Now, our region is probably well ahead of other regions in that we have already developed our core data set work, or are developing our core data set work. That's not necessarily the case in other regions. So in some senses, we will now need to retrofit what we have already done into the core themes. But they are distinct pieces of work, and they do align very well together. So that seems to be a good moment for me to switch over to the storyboard and show you the storyboard. Now, this is a piece of work which has been done by Mark Iliff, who now works for the GGIM Secretariat in New York. And I just wanted to show you to it, not to go through it in any great detail, because you'll be able to do that yourself in slower time, but just show you that it exists really, and can be used as a resource to promote the idea of fundamental data themes. So let me come down. So here we go. So it's designed as, I think, in ArcGIS. So what he has done, whoops, I'm going to have to put the microphone down for a minute. No, I'm just going to have to carry on down. I was hoping to go back up again, but it's I can't do that. Right. So what he's done is taken a lot of the text from the data theme descriptions which we have produced, and with some very natty graphics and images, turned it into a storyboard, which you can then scroll down. So here we go. I should just say a word about the GGRF as we go past this one. The Global Geodetic Reference Frame, you will probably appreciate, is not a data theme as such, it's a reference frame. The reason it's been included in the data themes is at least partially to ensure, partially because it was we were encouraged to do it by member states at GGIM 7 last year to ensure that it was not overlooked. The feeling was that if we included it in the fundamental, with the word fundamental attached to it, that it would always be included. So whilst it's not, strictly speaking, a data theme, it is fundamental, and that's this is an example of what we've been doing, having to be pragmatic and designed for the non-geospatial audience rather than perhaps the more purist geospatial audience. So first of all comes the GGRF, along with the text which relates to the GGRF, which is hopefully easily understandable by the, as I said, the non-geospatial Also in here is the geodesy video which has been developed. I'll just play that for a moment, see if that works. I won't show all of that, just to let you know it's part of the storyboard. So geographical names, and you'll see for each one, we have the SDGs which are related to that particular theme set out, which is a useful reference. Geographical names. Here come addresses. Functional areas. Functional areas is the name we have given to what we often refer to as administrative areas, but the idea is to make it more all-encompassing, so that it's not just about administration, it's also about service delivery and activity management. Buildings and settlements. This is an example of where we have used two different scales essentially within one theme, because settlements are essentially comprised of buildings, so we can put the two together into one theme, and it becomes a question of resolution. Land parcels, which we are familiar with. Transport networks. Population distribution. This is where we start to overlap quite significantly with some of the statistical agencies' work. And this is one where we had quite a lengthy discussion with Marie on what we should put into fundamental data and what was not appropriate for fundamental data. So we've had a discussion or an engagement with the statistical agencies to ensure that we get this one right. Land cover and land use. Geology and soils. I'm sorry this is a bit jerky. It's because the download speed at my end is a little bit slow, and I suspect by the time I transmitted it to you as an audience, it's getting even jerkier, so apologies for that. Physical infrastructure is perhaps an unusual term. The idea here is to include industrial and utilities facilities, so all the government services, buildings, hospitals, schools, all that sort of thing. So it's utilities and government services. It matches up quite closely with the Inspire theme. Water, of course. Now, ortho imagery. This again is an oddity. We included ortho imagery because in that common denominator chart, imagery was one theme I put in inverted commas that everybody seemed to want to include. Now, technically, it's not a data theme; it's a data source. However, it is widely used when interpreted as a source for many other themes. So, rather like the geodetic reference frame, for pragmatic reasons, we have included it so that it gets the attention it deserves. And the last thing on here is a nice video of using drones to collect imagery in Zanzibar. Okay, I won't show it all to you because I won't show you the whole thing because this presentation isn't about the storyboard particularly, but just as an example. So, thank you very much. I'm going to pass my control back to. Oh, Saulius, you have control anyway, don't you?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Claire. Thank you. Now is the time to questions. If anyone has any question to Claire, I don't see any question in the chat window. So if anyone like to pose an oral question, please raise your hand. I don't see any raised hand. So understood that your presentation was crystal clear, Claire.
Either that or they've all gone to get a cup of coffee.
Yeah. Okay.
Dominique speaking.
Yes, please, Dominique. Yeah.
I have a question. Is funding by the World Bank also possible in Europe if data is really missing, if big gaps?
I don't really know the answer to that, Dominique. I suspect the funding from the World Bank is focused on the developing world, not on Europe. But the criteria for funding will be different from region to region.
Thank you. We have some developing countries in Europe still, so I think World Bank funds probably are available to non-European Union countries, but for European Union countries, probably not.
Yes, I think that's probably true. But I think that, as I said, the criteria for World Bank funding is a separate issue, really. I suppose, as to whether they get World Bank funding or not, they still have to put together the right package of measures which the World Bank would support. But the idea of the geospatial framework is to give a sort of template against which a country can measure itself to identify where assistance would be beneficial. So the argument can be made to ministers of finance that there is a good case for investment by the World Bank.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't see any raised hands, so I'm a bit conscious on time. And just before closing the webinar, I'd like to ask François and Dominique if you want to add something more after the Claire's presentation.
Just I would like to insist on the synergies that exist between global fundamental data and European core data. So really, I would like to say that these are not concurrent, competitive proposals. I mean, really, concerning the implementation, we have to think in terms of synergies. Really, we don't have to. Really, I think that we can say that there is not a duplication, but there are more synergies. So this is, I think, an important point I wanted to stress. Really, we have synergies, not duplication, but we have synergies between the two working groups. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, François. I think that's an important point because it's easy to think when we have a core data group and we have a fundamental data group that they are in some way doing the same thing, and it's an easy assumption to make, but I think hopefully this morning we've shown that that's not the case.
Okay, thank you very much. I think on this positive note we can close the webinar. Thank you very much for all three presenters. This was very interesting, at least for me, and I hope the audience enjoyed. And as I said, the record will be available to everyone, and the slides as well in the PDF format. So thank you very much, and have a nice day. I'm closing the webinar. Bye.
Thank you. I need to go and get a tray. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.